Welcome to our second SODAA panel of the day. We're going to talk about creative counter strategies in cultural spaces, the club, and beyond. We've got some really fantastic speakers here today who all have experience in navigating existing venue and events infrastructures, educating and creating inclusive environments that I think really push the boundaries of what our cultural spaces can kind of do and what they can look like and what they can feel like. And I think this is definitely of interest to SODAA as we're on our journey to eventually operate a club. But at the moment, we're very much operating within existing venues like here, like the Bath. And I would say that all of you have really, SODAA's really inspired by all of your work, basically. And I know that you've all been coming up with ways to both occupy and create environments that sort of encourage different kinds of participation, which is really interesting. So yeah, we just have a lot to learn from you, and we're super thankful that you're here and excited to hear more about what you do and how you go about doing it. So I just a note on the format of the panel is that we'll have a discussion and I'll ask the panelists some questions, and then I'll leave the last 15 to 20 minutes to open it up to the floor. So if you have any questions, comments, responses, anything, definitely hold on to them for them. But yeah, do you just want to do a round and each introduce yourselves? There's the mic here.
Hey everyone, my name is Aliyah. My pronouns are they, them, and I wear many hats. I'm here on a couple of fronts, I guess. So I work at Goodnightout campaign as a trainer and consultant, and we work on progressing nightlife, creating safer spaces in nightlife, particularly around gender-based violence. But my work specifically in that focuses in on progressing nightlife for queer and disabled communities within that. So we do a lot of work in that realm. I'm also part of Riposte, where we put on alternative queer art, performance, music, combination sort of raves, but also social spaces and workshops. And I also do other work as a producer programmer at Voices Radio, as a festival producer, and as an educator facilitator. And I was also listed under Thempress, which is my DJ and performer name. So I'm around nightlife, music, community, education.
Hiya, so my name's Janie. As a kind of introduction, I'm a team member of, which is pretty much the kind of one of the catalysts for E-Numbers, the kind of event that we're going to be talking about. Heart Club is this gallery that's all around championing neurodiversity in the arts. We've just finished a kind of...
Hold the microphone a little bit.
This close? Yeah. Oh, I can hear back. Okay, sorry guys. Did you hear everything I said, or should I repeat it? It's okay? Yeah, okay, sweet. Basically, they've just finished this program, which is an alternative arts education for people who might not be able to participate in kind of standard arts education due to costs or disability or various different things. So we had this amazing cohort of 6 artists, and actually through our kind of co-collaboration, the kind of ideas around E-Numbers, which we're going to chat about, came about.
Hi, I'm Lizzie. I'm also with Janie as part of E-Numbers, and we know each other from Heart Club. I work at Heart Club. I also work at another space, working with neurodivergent artists, specifically at the moment autistic and learning disabled artists. Sometimes that means collaborating or empowering the artist to set the tone and boundary of collaboration. Sometimes that looks like peer support. Sometimes that looks like arts facilitation, all of which mean quite different things. Sometimes that looks like chats about sex and dating. Sometimes that looks like listening to Zombies 2 on repeat. Sometimes it looks like watching Minecraft tutorials. And sometimes it's always learning, and sometimes it's just simply not necessarily doing the artwork, but the work of existing itself. We don't do E-Numbers, but yeah, no.
And then we do have a fourth panelist who might join us halfway through the panel, who's Nadine from Pxssy Palace. But for now, we're just going to move along with these fantastic people. But the first thing I wanted to ask you was if you could tell us a bit more about the kinds of spaces you create with all of your many collectives and the things you're a part of, and also through e-numbers, and also maybe a little bit about why you felt it was important or why you kind of like called to create those spaces.
I'm going to start. So as Lizzie said, me and Lizzie collaborate with a whole bunch of people around e-numbers. The kind of origin of e-numbers, in a way, I guess I instigated it, I curated it or started it, but really it was in a kind of conversational way. It wasn't like, this is the set tone of the night. It was when I felt at Heart Club and in quite a lot of gallery spaces that there's, or studio spaces, that there's sometimes this set idea of an outcome or a set kind of stagnant gallery experience, and I felt that some of the kind of realizations that we were having as a group, as a gallery, of around what it meant to be neurodivergent, could we have that in a kind of more live environment, which then led us to create e-numbers, which was like it's like installation, film, performance, music, and all the kind of things in between, and we're designing it in a way, inviting people in at different points in their career, different points in their thinking about their creative identity, their identity as someone who's neurodivergent. And through that, we've, using the term neuroqueer, which we found, which Lizzie's going to explain more to, kind of really like help us as we seek to, it's not just about creating an event, but also have a conversation, a community, and like almost, and I was saying this, it almost feels therapeutic. It's like this thing that it's like a space to have a conversation in the ways that we want, rather than trying to have a conversation or trying to fit into a space or exist within a space. It's actually, how can we take control of the space in a way that would open up conversations? So I'm just going to give to Lizzie to talk about neuroqueer.
I'll do neuroqueer later, I think.
Okay.
But I guess for now, it's like the origins of the neurodiversity movement was like primarily within the autistic community, which kind of came about at the birth of the internet. But still people find today that there's like a very much need for physical in real life spaces. Like we thrive very well online, but people very much struggle to like organize and be in neurodivergent space together. So that was a necessity for having this night. And part of every event, which I'm going to quote because I feel like it's quite key to like central to our event, it kind of frames it better than what I can really explain. Mel Baggs, who was like one of the like key figureheads in the origins of the autistic community and the broader neurodiversity movement, has a video called In My Language, which we play at every event and will plan to continue to play at every event. And in their words, they say in this video, which I really recommend you watch, it's on YouTube, it says, "I find it very interesting, by the way, that failure to learn your language is seen as a deficit, but failure to learn my language is seen as so natural that people like me are officially described as mysterious and puzzling. Rather than anyone admitting that it is themselves who are confused, not autistic people or otherwise cognitively disabled people who are inherently confusing. Far from being purposeless, the way that I move is an ongoing response to what is around me. Ironically, the way that I move when responding to everything around me is described as being in a world of my own. They judge my existence, awareness, and personhood on which of a tiny and limited part of the world I appear to be reacting to."
Thank you. Just before we move on to Aliyah, could I also ask, like, what types of venues or spaces have you been running e-numbers in?
So we've only done a couple of events. So the first one was in quite a small venue called Spanners, but it was great. The people who run it really were up for the idea, the concept, which was really important to me. I didn't, that it felt like, it almost felt like they were also like partnering with us. And then the next space was Avalon, which is also in Southeast London. That was a great space because they just kind of let us take over the space. Like we painted the toilets, we cleared out a whole like clear out space, but it was hard. Like I emailed lots of places and it was kind of hard to navigate that. So yeah, they're the kind of places.
Cool, thank you so much. Yeah, Aliyah.
Amazing. So yeah, I guess I'll go on two fronts here, where with Goodnightout that's looking more, I suppose, at the structural changes that we can enact into nightlife, and by that it means the whole economy within that. So as artists, as promoters, event organisers and producers, but also venue owners, bar staff, security teams, and all the infrastructure that exists. And that includes infrastructure that we might not have direct control over, but that we can hope to share resource with and encourage change within. So with Goodnightout, it came out of, I guess, gender-based violence conversations, and that is the root of the work. But it's an understanding within that all of this is inherently intersectional, that gender-based violence doesn't exist within a vacuum of gender only, but this crosses over tenfold with race, with sexuality, with disability, with class, with so many other factors. So being able to cement that approach into any way of educating and sharing resource with people across the industry in all forms. So the work that Goodnightout does is super important and has been going on for quite a number of years now, and it's really great to see it continuing to expand. And with Riposte, it's something that I'm really just in awe of being part of, and I really love the spaces that we're creating through it. And at the core of it, one of the key themes is connection and being able to facilitate connections, whether that's across art forms, where there's things that are music-based, performance-based, visual-based, and things that can't be put into any boxes, but also between each other. So, for example, having opening ceremonies at the start of every event that we do, which then goes into a huge rave, for example, or by having very small, intimate workshops and gatherings, and being able to create a sort of family feeling amongst people that I feel often gets left out of some raves in that sense. So having spaces that aren't only intense music and hard dancing, which I love as much as a lot of people, but also spaces that are very chill, that are very sensory aware, that have opportunities to have connections, have chats, and also a space to experiment, a space to play, a space to be weird, and a space to explore queerness in all of its alternative, its radical, and its political rootings. So bringing activism into that and bringing ideas around how we can extend ourselves and explore the possibilities of our queerness in community with one another.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think you kind of spoke about influencing venues kind of via Goodnightout campaign, and you also kind of touched a bit on approaching different venues who would kind of be on board with your idea. So I think the next question I wanted to ask is just about how current existing venues infrastructures can either help or maybe sometimes hinder what you're trying to achieve. Is there any specific challenges that you keep coming up with time and time again, or are there things that really work well that you just want to share?
I can share from my point of view. The first one being is just accessibility in terms of physical accessibility, can a wheelchair user get into the building? Do they have accessible toilets? For example, Avalon didn't have that, so we spent a significant amount of the budget, and I'm not saying this to be I'm just saying this as a reality, to get a disabled Portaloo, because I just didn't sit right to put on an event where a big part of anyway, that aspect. And they were all up for that. And then I think when you're looking at affordable venues, they don't necessarily, the accessibility issue, disabled toilets, there's less of that in kind of those kind of more affordable venues, or venues who might be up for the idea. Other ways in which we thought about accessibility is, for example, I'm quite mindful in which venues I approach and thinking, if they do they want to get the idea? Do the people in the bar, will the staff, will they welcome the people that who are going to be part of the space there? Even if I haven't met them before the event, I'll make sure that I'm there to chat to them, to talk to them about the kind of what the event's about, and also have someone at the door to make sure that there's also someone from our team or group there. And we also created an access doc, which is such a basic, straightforward thing, and I know it's not very sexy or anything, but basically it's just telling people what are the different routes, what are the different kind of transport routes there, pictures of the venue, just to help people almost think about the space and how they might be in it. And that seems like small information and a little bit of a sense of the night, but that can really help someone to know when they're coming, what's going to feel like, And also it's kind of, we mindfully kind of program it in a way where the energy almost goes up. So people can come for different parts. So if they're not wanting a more, it's kind of the intensity is towards the end of the evening and there's different parts. But we also add a chill out space, which I'm going to give to Lizzie to chat about. Just that you designed it. What its purpose was.
So we had a chill out space. The main criticism I'd say for the chill out space was that it was raining and it was semi-sheltered space. I think there was it was used in ways that I didn't expect it to be used, but it seemed to be, I didn't want to create rules and regulations around who and how to use the space, I didn't want to be policing or like dictating who and when and how you could or couldn't use the space. It just didn't make sense who's an authority to do so. But that was kind of an inevitable like thing that I couldn't be in control of. But I don't know if what I was going to say was relevant to this bit yet. Sorry. Trying to like filter out which bits when I say when before I go on like a long tangent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But also just to say that like half our budget was on like we didn't have a massive budget, but at least half our budget was on accessibility, and that was really important. So yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Amazing. So yeah, in terms of venues, I think something that's really important to consider that maybe sometimes gets lost because it's not knowledge that I think is as transparent as it should be, is that while we can't control the physical spaces that we use all the time, where we know that there's a huge shortage of venues in London particularly, so many queer venues especially have reduced over the years, and we're constantly losing venues due to gentrification, due to the effects of financial issues, of class and other systemic issues. And so it does mean that oftentimes we are limited on the spaces that we can use, particularly if we have certain, whether that's access requirements, if that's capacity, if that's the types of art that we want to be able to show in a space, or location as well is like a huge factor, and so many other things that play into it. But what we can do is think about how we can make the spaces work for us. So how is that in terms of, for example, having briefings with a whole security team before the event starts, and understanding that security is like a structure that is not going to be changed overnight, and it is flawed in so many ways. But what we can do is, for at least the night that we put something on, try to ensure that safety is prioritized in the best way possible, and understand that a safe space never exists, but safer spaces are the only thing that can exist. So thinking about practical ways to implement that, understanding that everyone who's on your team has access to a document that outlines that, or can have like a verbal conversation around it, or can access that information in a way that makes sense for them. Being able to chat with venue managers and have that conversation openly. If that's things such as a venue doesn't have gender neutral toilets, but you can change that signage for the night. And again, like having clear signage around a venue throughout that whole period as well. So that's something that I found people can do to take things into their own hands. And as well as that, thinking about like policies that you have in place, where a lot of things we say that we want to do, we say that we want to enact, but unless it's in policy, which doesn't have to be as scary as thinking it's this big legally binding document, but it's something that is clear that everyone can access, that everyone can potentially have a say in, if you're working in a non-hierarchical structure, which I would hope that everyone aims to do, even if it's not what you're currently doing. Sort of just helps to lay the groundwork for how a venue might not be perfect, but you're doing what you can within your means and within your resource to make it suitable for the audiences that you want to have in your space.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so you've both kind of shared about some of the like specific measures that you put in your events to kind of make them more inclusive and encourage different kinds of participation, which is great, because that was going to be my next question. But I also wanted to like just ask how receptive people are to some of these measures, like whether that's a venue or an audience member. And do you think like has this changed over time since you've started working in events?
How has it changed? Sorry, could you just repeat the last bit of the question?
Yeah, so
how receptive people were. Okay, yeah, so what I was pausing on my point earlier on the chill out space was, so in the event, there was like some ignorant, like not conscious expectations, but some sort of like not conscious assumptions that people were just going to be able to just be themselves in the space just because on the promo we were like, be yourself, as though that was going to just magically allow people to move in the way that they move. And I think one of the like criticisms I would have for the way in which I set up the chill out space was that expectation that people were just going to feel free to use it in whatever ways they felt they needed to, when many of us are like forced to suppress these things in day-to-day life, that you can't just like automatically turn on a switch and allow these things to happen. So I think for future, I would like to do like some kind of like stimming workshop or like some engaging performative thing where people are openly encouraged to stim, and or even having workshops at certain points with different activities that people can choose to engage or not engage, which then just like opens up that as like a collective collaborative thing. That means that when you're doing it later in the night or whatever, you're feeling more comfortable to do so because it's been done like together. But receptiveness, I think that was actually quite good feedback from the chill out space, but that would be a definite improvement for me personally that I think would help.
Thank you.
And I guess one thing to kind of add, like when we invited people in to be part of it, whatever way, like it definitely wasn't, I didn't ask anyone about their neurodivergent identity. Like that, they didn't have to explicitly reference that or anything like that. I just invited them into space and said, this is what we're trying to do. And people either use that as an opportunity. For example, someone who does drag performances, they did a drag performance where they did more explicitly about being autistic, and maybe they wouldn't have done that in a traditional drag space, but it's that opportunity to like try something new. It doesn't have to be this perfect piece, but it's something that you can hopefully, and like you say, you definitely can't tell someone it's a safe space, and that's why I don't pretend to people or invite people in being like, it's going to be a place where everyone accepts everything you say. Definitely not, but that's the intention, and then if you want to. And like what I saw and what I've seen since it kind of helps people to kind of, the idea or the hope that you might have, if there's a space where you can try that, then that might give you a way to experiment and then take that into other creative spheres or other kind of ways in which people are existing. And that's where I kind of hope it does become more political. Like like I said, it was therapeutic, but I don't mean therapeutic in a soft way. I mean like affirming and like channeling, like so that when you talk to another venue or you're involved in another exhibition, you can be more like, I'm not going to reply to this, or I'm not going to engage like this. It's a more of a making that the norm, that it's not. And also the one point just to say as well, like me and Lizzie talk a lot about this, is like being comfortable with the awkwardness or the uncomfortableness, like making that kind of normal. So I'm not saying that E-Numbers was this perfectly comfortable like oasis. It was like, and there would be awkward parts as things that didn't flow, but like that being part of it, like comfortably awkward or like intentionally awkward, and like allowing for that awkwardness to like connect or understand or step out. People had a choice.
I think things have changed drastically. I feel like I've been raving for like, I don't know, like the last 10 years or something, and it's been a minute of seeing things shift and change a lot. Like I'm from East London originally, so it's definitely been seeing things change within your home environment. And I think for me, that shift is put down to a couple of places, which one of them is home, where it's this idea of how do you welcome people into a space as if it were your home? How do you create that sense of belonging and that sense of, if someone comes into your house, you might not be like, here are my ground rules, but you might ask, do I take my shoes off before I come in? Do you want me to grab anything on the way? Like, what can I do to make you feel more comfortable? So thinking about how do you create a space of home within a public environment? So again, that's not going to look like your shoes off or anything like that in a rave space necessarily, but it's what can I do to make you feel more comfortable? Not saying this space is inclusive of everyone, but I designed this space with you in mind from the very get-go. So from that first initial planning phase of it, actually, how do we center, not only just welcome in, but actively center people of color? How do we center disabled people? How do we center people who are often most cut out of these public spaces and actually make them feel like the space is theirs to claim and not just a space where they happen to be welcome into just for, maybe one night coincidentally or something. So being able to have things that, again, feel like homemaking and collective homemaking, in that process. Alongside that, I think one of the things that has led to such a shift is that people are more aware of and rooting more in grassroots activism frameworks. So before I was working in events, my background was in campaigning and grassroots activism, and that taught me so much about how you do things such as setting up spaces, how you facilitate, how you think about political power structures, but also community power structures, and how we relate to one another on an interpersonal level, but also on the level of these systemic factors inherently exist for all of us. So how do we acknowledge these? How do we take accountability? How do we learn to lean into conflict because it's inevitable? And how do we learn to show care, to show love, to actually connect in a meaningful way that is personable to everyone? So it's not prescriptive, but it's descriptive, and you create what that looks like for unique to each person and unique to each event. So it's not this one size fits all model, but it's a holistic experience of shifting a venue or shifting an event or shifting rave and nightlife culture as a whole, which is a big journey, but it's something that I think, through the different things that all of us are doing collectively adds up to something that I think is the tangible change that we've seen happen in this last time period. I don't know how long, but especially the last 5 years or so, I think things have radically shifted, and particularly post-pandemic as well. As I think the rest of the world realized the accommodations that disabled people ask for aren't actually that extreme to be asking for, because it affected everyone suddenly, and everyone actually started taking into account things that are rooted in disability justice, for example, and starting to implement them, which I think is amazing to see happen more.
Great, thank you so much. Hearing you speak, it just kind of reminds me of I used to do venue programming, so I used to work at a venue, and just we learned the most from the people who are putting on the events in our spaces. There's just such an enormous amount of wealth from people like you coming to venues. And yeah, that was about, and kind of just showing venues how to hold space, whether it's their own in-house events or just generally amongst their staff. So yeah, it was really great to hear you talk a little bit more about that from kind of the other side. But just, I guess off the back of that, I wanted to ask, I guess, what you hope the impact of what you do is, whether that's, shifting a venue culture, whether that's on the people who are coming, or whether that's on kind of your collaborators or workers, what you hope the impact is of your events or what you're doing. Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry, this is typically how our chats go. Janie was just suggesting I define the term neuroqueer, which is quite central to what we do, because it's like an action and a doing word, and it's like an ongoing, always futurity that was quite central to our space. So neuroqueer was a term that was coined by multiple people at the same time, but individually, and they all came together when we're like, oh, we've all just come up with the same term. The main woman is trans autistic woman, Nick Walker, and Melanie Yagu, who are the two main ones who I have looked to, and our understanding of the term is to neuroqueer is to to actively reimagine the many social structures that seek to define, erase, and exclude us. It is to defy and disrupt neuronormativity, and to re-embrace our most authentic selves, our ways of being, knowing, and doing in the world, otherwise pathologized in neuronormative domains. So it clearly draws on queer theory and also necessarily black feminism and its utilization of intersectionality. We feel like the nuance of this term is primarily for us, the necessity of it is really in the fact that it's not been till very recently, and it's still nowhere near where it needs to be. Neurodivergence hasn't really been understood as a category of social difference, as though unlike everybody else, we live in a world of our own and we have social deficits, and therefore the problem is seen as innate within us rather than a problem of society's misunderstanding and stigmatizations. There was one more thing I was going to say on that. Neuroqueer. Lost out my brain. There was I can't actually remember.
Okay, no worries.
Sorry.
Basically, that is it.
I might come back.
Okay. And to as I said, together, make
and
yeah, how much resonates, I guess, is like the vital thing. But then also, like, I've learned through different like in work environments and friendship groups, like you can make so much effort to like change something or to fit in or to like try and understand the rules, and even when they're unspoken, and it takes so much energy. But actually, there's actually, as people together, as finding kind of allies, or like not necessarily that you're going to be best friends, but people, if you can see back to you, and that's why we show Mel Bags, who's like been able to articulate their experience so well. It genuinely, like, people who watch it or you see it and you've had that experience of people saying that you're confusing when it's your most natural way of being. It is like, if that scene said back to you, is really powerful, and is what art and being part of a rave and all of those things, that's what we hope to do, I guess, is basically it.
Yeah, I think impact is a really important one, because with anything that anyone does in life, I think, at least my perspective on approaching life as a whole, which is a big philosophical, slightly existential thing, is doing everything with intention, and actually knowing what that intention is and moving with integrity in every action as much as you can. Not everything is going to be with that, but as much as you can center that, the more that I think everything in life shows up in a slightly different way. And I think keeping intention at the heart of everything. So understanding why you're doing something really at the crux of it. And then impact plays out in varying ways dependent on that. So in terms of the work with Goodnightout, I think the impact has been seen quite dramatically, not just because of what we do, but because of wider conversations and other related movements that people have been taking part in that relate to this idea of safety, where we're having more open conversations around what that means, because safety is such a unique concept to everyone. What feels safe for me might feel really jarring for you, and vice versa. So it's understanding that safety isn't this like experience, this blanket term that we can throw on something and be like, okay, now this space is safe for you, or now this experience is safe for you. Because again, that's taking autonomy out of the hands of people. And it's thinking about, how do we best give autonomy back to those who have been most marginalized and most oppressed societally. So zooming out of just the event space, but actually if we look at the wider lens of what currently already exists and what doesn't exist, and what barriers are in place. So thinking about like the social model of disability, for example, and putting that into place when we think about safety. So not that it's the fault of an individual that they don't feel safe in a space, but actually what barriers societally exist, and what can we do to try and remove those and make it easier for someone who we use an analogy at Goodnightout about hurdles. So if someone is coming to share a disclosure about something that's happened to them, we'll describe it as running a hurdle race, where from the moment where an incident that has happened that has disrupted their night, that might be traumatic, that might be whatever terms they want to use to describe that, they're going from the initial shock of that happening to then trying to navigate maybe a really busy space, maybe trying to speak to someone that they feel comfortable with, trying to navigate in a dark space, maybe trying to know who the right person to speak to is, actually managing to get the words out, all of these things before they'll be heard, before they'll feel seen, before they'll be understood. So it's thinking about, how can we take away as many of those hurdles in the way so that when they reach you, they're not as exhausted as they might otherwise be. So does that mean just making the line of contact really transparent, getting rid of all the things that are often in place in a club environment to actually make the process just a lot simpler? And I think rooting back to impact, the way we can cause a lot more impact is actually thinking, how do we most directly relate to the people who we're sharing space with? Because community doesn't exist as this like standalone idea, this abstract concept, but it's something that we're actively within. So I'm in community right now with everyone in this room in a certain way, and we're sharing a certain type of connection in this moment. So how can I actually show up for people here in this moment in time and understand that that might not be what needs to happen tomorrow or the day before, but being present moment situated in that. But I guess going to the shortening of impact, having impact, it's more like Goodnightout, creating change, safer spaces, making people feel like nightlife can be more than what it's had to exist as, and that it can be reimagined, and that change can be practical. And with Riposte, it's being able to create connections between people. And for some people, it might be their first time ever playing a DJ set out somewhere. It might be their first time showing new work, doing work in progress. it might be their first time in a queer community space, and making that space as welcoming, as open as possible, and as much of a space to connect, to collaborate, to explore, and yeah, rooting that in the basis that it's something that it's a collective that organically grew out of a home space. So how do we bring that as much to people out publicly, and yeah, impact.
That was great. Thank you so much. And you spoke a little bit earlier about kind of the changes in attitudes and maybe like the changes in like just general cultural landscape in like culture in different kinds of spaces, and how that's been intersecting with grassroots activism. And I was just wondering if there was anything particular that you expect or hope to see going forwards in our cultural spaces. I mean, and either one of you can answer that first, because I know you just spoke, but yeah.
I guess what you were the point around, specifically the point around like what we've learned through online events and making things like available in different formats, those sorts of things. Like we're hoping our next e-numbers will actually be online. It kind of ticks a lot of box, but we're thinking this could be a potentially more comfortable, another way for us to bring people together that would feed into an event afterwards, definitely. And also people putting funding towards accessibility. Like I think for people who are, for big venues, for people for things that are well funded, the accessibility is doable in some sense. So that just being set front and center, and not that that will be like tick box done, but that it's an ongoing conversation that people feel able to say, can I have this? Can I do that? It's more like opening up that conversation as like a normal part of being, just like asking where the toilet is. It'd be like, what's this? And people being receptive to all those questions is something that I hope to see. Okay. Yeah.
I've just remembered something that we were talking about earlier, with links to this, that also we were discussing how, sorry, a lot of the artists and people we work with e-numbers, all the contributors, collaborators, many of them haven't had previous experience in even like art at school or any arts experience or any sort of work involving their creative passions. And when we had like a feedback discussion on like who would like to like take a more leadership role, actually a lot of people were like, no, Janie, you can do all the boring bits of like set up, like don't want to do that. But there was people wanting to expand on new skills, but a lot of that for us, we were saying how the language that's used in like commission, submission, all of this for like various events is so inaccessible that like majority of people that I work with are not necessarily going to be able to even understand or respond to this email. You just stop at the first hurdle. And so the idea of mentoring, like for example, we have one artist, I don't know whether I won't. We have one artist who has like a really great visual eye that we would like to support to curate the show instead of just being an artist, to mentor her, but also so that she's not just like not just being supported to like be able to do this independently with other spaces, but also that like in building this bridge of like the language of like how to respond, how to say what your needs are, how to disrupt really. So how to like be able to go out to other spaces and interact in this like very inaccessible world, but also to then be within that and disrupt that and bring change for others. And I think that if more events could be more, I don't know, like the amount of words that I use is so confusing. I'll just stop. Like I didn't actually reply to any emails. Janie did it for me. It's just quite inaccessible in that sense. And I think that would be what would be good to change.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so the question was just if there was anything particular that you hope to see going forward in our cultural landscape or venues or events.
Yeah, I think there's a whole lot. I think that there's a big thing, I think, around being able to share resource and knowledge more freely, where there's so many people I know who have amazing ideas or really want to do something but don't know where to begin with that. And you know, like a lot of us have different paths on how we ended up doing the things that we're doing now, which, you know, feel easy and like second nature at a certain point. But it's how do you actually bridge that gap so that someone who's totally new to that, and also understanding that's not even linked to age as well, and that people have different starting points and different experiences in life. So you can come into wanting to start doing something at any point in your life, and it doesn't have to be rooted to this like 18 to 25 bracket that everyone seems to put on everything, which inherently excludes a lot of people who face marginalization in a lot of ways. That's a whole other topic I could really go on about. But again, like being able to use the resource around you. So like for me, so many things I've learned have been from having conversations with people like in everyday spaces, and the understanding that formal education usually doesn't teach us the things that we need or the things that we want to see enacted into the spaces that we share with other people. So the fact that you learn so much from everyone around you, and I would love to see more spaces of like community collaboration and non-hierarchical, non-conventional education. So not just the events that we go to, but actually how do we do workshop spaces where people can actually propose an idea that they'd like to run for an hour or something. And maybe that means pairing them with someone who's done a lot of facilitation before to then have the confidence and a bit more belief in themselves to then run that session themselves. If that's something to do with actually a live event, maybe that, you know, we're willing to offer a bit of mentorship where we don't have to be like the most professional person in the field. We don't have to have been doing this for ages and ages, but we all have something that we can share, even if that's just being on the same level as someone, but having a slightly different perspective, and understanding that what we have to share is just as valuable as the maybe traditional structures that we've been taught hold all the knowledge and hold all the authority, and trying to shift that idea of like where knowledge and where power lies. And I think rooted to that is also this idea of actual material resource. So being able to have more funding, being able to have sharing more of our knowledge collectively, because there's so many conversations that happen in different rooms and different spaces. But what if we had a way to pull that resource together and actually, you know, not just keep these materials precious to ourselves, but understand that, I guess for me, this goes back to this idea of an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset, and that these things don't exist in scarcity, and that actually there's enough for everyone. And by sharing our resource, we're actually making the community that we have and the spaces that we have, the venues, the events, a lot stronger, because we're building a better foundation between ourselves instead of trying to hoard resource into like a secret room where no one else can access in case they take your idea from you or something. And just understand, like, everything that you do is going to be different and unique from someone else's because you're different and you're unique. And it's never truly going to be this. You can have the same idea and play it super differently. And that's part of the beauty of it, I think. But in a short, I think having more queer spaces, having more POC spaces, having more disabled spaces, like having more spaces that aren't just the typical models that we've seen happen over and over that don't actually serve the most marginalized in our communities.
Thank you so much. So I've got like one last question. We've got about 10 minutes left before I open up to the floor. But it was just basically, you know, in SODAA, we're dreaming, imagining what like a future venue could look like. And I just kind of wanted to kind of give that question to you and ask that if your collectives or you had like free reign over the design and creation of a venue or a cultural space, what is like like one of the things that you would hope to do or see in it?
I love this question because I think it's so fun to, like, you know what I mean, to creatively reimagine past the idea of, okay, we only have this budget and we only have this access, so we can only do these things. But actually, like, what if we threw it all out the window and just went everywhere with what it could be? For me personally, like, I can't speak on behalf of collectives, you know what I mean, because everyone's their own person. I think it's having enough space to roam, to explore, to play, and to have joy within that. So, you know, having enough spaces to move, to dance, to have an amazing sound system, because we lack that a lot. Like, actually having a lot of that stuff centered, of course, but also having enough spaces to chill and to be. So that could be a chill space where people are actively like chatting to one another, and it's designed for that. But also having a space like, so I have like a really, really massive bed because I love beds, and I also love baths. So like, if there was like just a complete like cushioned room, I would adore that. If there's a space that I could go and take naps, like, I don't know, like, I'm so fatigued all the time. Like, I'm like, I need to be able to take naps in a night, and it does a lot for me. If there was like, again, like just other spaces where your body can be soothed, where your mind can be soothed, spaces for workshops, like spaces where art can be shown and you don't have to constrain to like the limitations of, you know, mess or damage and all these things that get thrown into not being able to like actually create your creative vision. Having like outdoor spaces to roam, having indoor spaces, like there's so many possibilities, and I think having that co-created with the community where that could be like shifting installations that are part of the space and then people get to contribute to that visual vision every now and then. I think also having like rehearsal spaces, having spaces where people can develop between events is super important, like a community center almost. I basically want all of these things to exist in one. So you have like the nighttime space, but you also have a space that can be used in the daytime, that can be used soberly, that can be used for small groups, for large groups, and caters to different facets of the community and not just one tight bubble of what events should be, quote unquote, I guess.
I was actually just going to re-quote what you said earlier in linking. You said, what feels safe for me that isn't inevitably going to feel safe for you. And this has got quite a lot to do with like our working relationship, is that me and Janie are both neurodivergent, but we have very different sensory profiles. So what's very overstimulating to me is very energizing and regulating for Janie. And so that's kind of where I came on board with the project. So like, how do we be neurodivergent in space together? And this is still like a very much ongoing question. And I think maybe Janie might have been a bit taken aback yesterday. We were talking about, not taken aback, but I don't know, I think it was something I thought you knew, but you didn't know about me, a secret, that we were talking about this irony that in the AQ, which is like a preliminary diagnostic criteria test that's like not diagnostic, but it's like pre-diagnostic test. And one of the questions on it says, would you rather go to a party or a library? And supposedly, if you tick library, it's like likely autistic trait, depending on how many other questions you score, obviously. And so yesterday, Janie didn't realise until... Janie, it's quite funny for me being here because I would still say I would rather go to a library. I don't really spend much time at parties, so it's still. But what this is for me is like, what would that actually look like? What would it look like for me to enjoy and be comfortable at a party? And we're like slowly visualizing that, and I still don't know what that looks like. I mean, it would depend on like many factors in terms of. It's a very black and white question. It has no context, and like. I would probably like to go to a certain party and not a certain library, and like libraries have like loads of like social rules that make like disruptive bodies very uncomfortable and they're very visceral. But sometimes I can be much more myself at a party, and I did feel very much myself at E-numbers. So yeah, this is still for me personally ongoing. Like I don't know what that looks like, but we'll see, and if I know, I'll let you know.
Just to like. Say I love everything both of you guys said, and I think like for me it's that sensory environment. So I'm deaf, and I'm also part of this group called Deaf Rave, and then they have, which is almost too much, but they are really interested in like the bodily feeling of sound, which I'm sure lots of you are as well, and they're like talking about like vibration vests, and then also the flooring having like been like connected to the sound and all these things. And I just think there's so much to learn if we could just like open ourselves up to like what is it about space that draws us to it, and like making it like something that kind of can like, rather than it being like, oh, let's deaf people or different people in, but actually like how can that enhance all of our experience or as well. So yeah, that basically is just like to say like a highly kind of sensory space. But also I do think as well like having, I'm not sure in what sense, but like tiered systems, like almost acknowledging, being able to, before people come into a space, acknowledge the space that they take up. And I really like this about Pxssy Palace's model, that they have like a tier ticketed aspect to it. And I'm not saying that it's always perfect, and we try to do that with E-numbers by like income so we tried different things to kind of say that for some people coming into this space is going to be more difficult. They're going to get a tax. Because of safety concerns or things like that, they're going to get a taxi home. And that's a big cost for them. Whereas for some people getting a taxi home is not even a second thought. So having some way to kind of, not in a guilt way, but just kind of think about how what are the barriers or not barriers that we have into coming to space. And I don't know how we can make that more visible, but yeah, having those conversations.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Did you have something you wanted to add?
I mean, it wasn't as deeply thought out as that, but just something I forgot on my long list of an ideal space was we need more food at venues. Like, we don't have enough. Like for real, it's like we're doing these, like, I don't know, like 6 to 10 hour events, and we expect ourselves to exist on substances that aren't good for our bodies and they don't nourish us. And like, I think it's like just even reminding each other where you don't need to take care of someone throughout a whole night, but like checking in with your friends and being like, have you eaten? Have you drunken water? Like, just a little reminder, because it's so easy to forget. Like, and just having more food. And also, I don't go to an event if I know there's only one space for music and a smoking area. Like, because if I can't sit down in somewhere that isn't the smoking area, like, I'm not gonna do that to myself for 6 hours. Like, it's just really, really, I don't know. We just need more seating and more food.
Yes, 100% agree with everything that's been said. But thank you so much. That was amazing. I think we've got like a couple minutes left, so I think if it's all right with you, we'll open up to the floor. Yeah? Any questions? Comments?
I just want to say I love what you said about naps. Like,
Yeah.
you just have a sofa somewhere secluded where you can go and sleep.
Literally, I feel like people get quite surprised. So I usually nap before I go and DJ, and then I might nap after it. Like, and people are like, how do you do that? And I'm like, I don't know, my body like needs it. And then I've got at least 40 alarms set on my phone. So just do what your body needs. I think it's like meet yourself where you are, not where everyone else expects you to be.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments before we wrap up? Yeah, do you want to speak into the mic just so we can hear? Sorry.
I came a bit late, so I'm not sure if I've gotten fully everything. But wait, I'm gonna sit because my knee really hurts. I was wondering about like problems with communication. Are we talking about many different kind of events? What is the main line of this conversation before I say? Yeah. Just facilitation for any kind of event. Yeah, I wonder about like people that have difficulty sometimes opening up and connecting to people, like on a level of communication or getting to know people. And I wonder what kind of things can be in place to bring people together to look at each other and to maybe begin a conversation, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Kind of the idea, so people come to places with people they might already know, or they come to places with the intention maybe to open themselves up more and get to know people. So I wonder, yeah, that's what I wonder.
I'll briefly go because I feel like you'll have a lot to say. So I guess I can speak, personally from what we do at Riposte, where I mentioned it briefly earlier, but we do opening circles at the start of every event. So the first hour is usually a lot quieter, and we actively encourage people who might be shy or who might want to come on their own, who might not already have a big circle or even if you do have a big circle, like come during that time. And like myself and Eden, who also like does Riposte, like will facilitate sort of a circle space where we'll give like sort of, and we make it clear that no one has to respond to anything. Like if you just want to be there and be present in that way, that's totally fine. Engage as much as you want to in that time. But we'll have like sort of opening questions or prompts or like things to think about. Sometimes that's just verbal. Sometimes that's more activities that we run. For me, I'm also involved in like doing like sort of things that are rooted in spirituality practices and like facilitating spaces in that way, in circles in that sense. And I think that's taught me a lot about how to hold space and do activities that are quite mindful and quite thought-provoking and can encourage you to open up in a way that's not like intensely, what do you do, which we're all really tired of hearing, but like, how are you really? Or like, what brings you joy? Or like, what do you want to see? Like dreaming of future things that are joyful and situate you in positivity for that moment. Or sometimes it's like doing an artistic thing together, or like something that is open for people to join in on if they don't already feel like they could come into a space and just randomly meet someone in the middle of a club or in a smoking area or something.
something that we haven't yet implemented, but have been a thought for both events. We just like timing and etc. It wasn't our like top priority at that moment, but definitely something that we want to implement. I was actually inspired by a thought based on Pxssy Palace. I remember hearing that they have buddy badges, and that if you come on your own and you don't know anyone, a buddy will come and chat to you and see if you're all right and what if you want to like be introduced to their friends and stuff like that. But this was specifically about having communication badges that are optional to use if you want to use them. That might be like, hi, like I'd like to make friends, or like please don't talk to me unless you know me, or like I don't want to talk to you at all. Like a bunch of options so that people then have like initiations to discussion and prompts. Also like come and talk to me about, and then you just like write your favorite topic that you want to talk about, or like I want a job, like anything like that. It's like you might get hired, just to like prompt conversation, because small talk is really awkward, especially if you don't know anyone at the event. Or also just like, even if it's just like you might be enjoying the music, but it also might like inhibit your ability to converse. So to have these other methods of prompts is like super useful for people to be able to interact and to know who's like willing and comfortable. I feel like a lot of the time you're like, oh, I kind of want to speak to someone, but like what if they're like don't want to speak to me, or what if I get rejected? Whereas if you know that who wants to chat and who wants to make friends, then I feel like it makes things a lot easier, facilitate conversation that way.
Thank you. We probably got time for one or two more questions. If anyone has anything else they want to add, or comments, responses.
Hello. Thank you all so much. I think my question was about a couple of things that I think in many ways you answered before, but I was wondering, I'm not in the event space, but in the spaces that I occupy within the tech universe, all of us are really worried about sustainability of our collectives, of our projects, of the things that we're working to build together. And I think for all of you, I was wondering, how do you protect the space in yourselves that is like generative and allows for different futures and for imagining them? Because you're also caught up in, you know, the acts of like organizing everything, which takes a lot of your time and mental space. So I'm wondering how you protect that, or if you do or don't, and maybe share some tips for all the rest of us.
Thank you so much. Who wants to answer? Yeah.
Say something. I guess for me, like, it's almost, that's my question, and I'm almost, with the next E numbers, we really thankfully got some kind of like community funding, so we're trying to think of different ways to get funding, very small for the first one, so we're thinking of different funding models, but I don't think I'm going to put on another event, and maybe the online one is a hybrid, but after that, where we haven't got funding, and if we're not, and asking ourselves, is this actually adding to our community? I don't want to just put on another event just for the sake of it, or the sake of a thing, but like having that as part of it, because definitely burnout is absolutely like rife in any kind of community organizing group. So that's part, but then also this idea that we're doing around like job roles for different people. So the plan is to have different people who are already part of it to take on responsibility for different parts, and to have like mentoring built around that, who's people outside of E-numbers community who have are in positions of like, I guess, who have more stability, and it's a chance for them to connect with someone who maybe hasn't, like you were saying about facilitation, like who doesn't, maybe not through the same education or social settings that would enable them to access the space that they're currently in, and creating kind of like a web, I suppose, of support, and a web of ownership of different sections, and also just being like, I like, even last meeting, we have these reflection meetings, I'm like, you can change, shall we change the name? Shall we do this? Like letting it morph with the interest of the community. It could turn into purely online event. It could turn into purely an art installation, like it being this morphing thing. It's not like E-numbers is a set idea, I guess, is how I'm trying to make it sustainable, I suppose. Is there
Yeah, I think with that, it's not being afraid of change, where I think like it can be quite a default to be really scared of change. But for me personally, I find a lot of grounding in transience, and the idea that things come full circle, or they shift in different forms, but they'll return to what they need to be, and letting things be what they, like allowing process to take place. and understand that the way that whether that's like your core team that you work with, or the way that your event looks, the size of it, the space that it's in, anything to do with that, like what it is one year might be very different next year. And that doesn't mean that it's not you still. It just means that you're shifting to what your needs are, to what your community needs are, to know that our needs aren't this static thing. And like, I guess like if we go to the idea of consent, right? It's not this thing that's set in stone. Once you say yes to it, it's always that. It's you're always checking in with yourself and with the other people that you work with. Is this what we all want right now? Are we all enthusiastically going towards the same vision, or are we wanting different things? And do we then need to renegotiate what the context of our arrangements are? Really thinking about it in relational terms, I think, is so important, and not just like this is a business or this is a project, but actually there's a very human element to it, and people's own visions, ideas, emotions are tied into that. So how do you work with that? And from that, I think having check-ins regularly, like how you might do in a relationship setting, doing that with your collective and being like, it might feel a bit formal sometimes, but let's review what we've done. Is it working? Why is it not working? And what can we do differently? Or what would it look like? Again, with the idea of like imagining your ideal space, thinking about in that utopian sense, what would it look like if we were doing everything that we wanted and resource wasn't an issue? And then how do we do that within the scope that we currently have? And how do we change and grow in that time as well?
Thank you so much for that insight. I think we're going to wrap up there because we've got a really packed program of performances and events and stuff happening all over this space. But just like really quickly, is there any events that you have coming up, or is there anything you want to tell just about like how people can find out more about what you do?
I can quickly say Instagram, I guess, with this E-numbers. Like as I say, this is online event. We'd love to, if you guys have got ideas, if you've got skills that you think or thoughts, like it's definitely, as I say, an open door, open conversation. So yeah, we'd love to keep in contact and see.
For Goodnightout, we're Goodnightout campaign on all platforms, probably. So Goodnightout campaign, and feel free to check out what we do or get in touch if you're interested in sort of having training for yourself, for your groups or anything. For Riposte, we're Riposte, RIPOSTE.London, mostly on Instagram, but we can be on other things if you want us to be. And for me, I'm at Thempress, as in like non-binary Empress, Thempress, on Instagram.
Great. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening. And I think there's going to be a performance soon in the next room. So yeah, definitely stick around.